Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Okay, I'll Ask Conversations with Daniel. I recently had the chance to sit down with Grayson Caldwell, an expert on sustainability in the coffee industry. Grayson graduated from Columbia University SIPA with her Master's of Public Administration in Development Practice and is a 2023 Sustainability Award finalist for the Specialty Coffee Association. As an avid coffee lover, I've always had questions about the environmental and economic issues surrounding coffee. Like, what does sustainable even mean? And what is fair trade or direct trade for that matter? Conversing with Grayson would be a great way to answer those questions. So please join me in welcoming my dear friend and colleague, Grayson Caldwell. Hi, Grayson. Thank you for finally sitting down and talking with me. And I say finally because I haven't seen you in a couple of years, I guess. So thank you for joining me in this conversation.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm very excited about this conversation because we get to talk about something that I've always thought was really dear to me, and that is a cup of coffee. That I'm actually was a late bloomer to coffee. I didn't drink coffee when I was growing up, but I went to Rome about 10, 15 years ago and had my first cappuccino. And that was really my first foray into coffee. Ooh. And fell in love with it. And people have kind of called me a coffee snob every now and then because I get really excited about it and pretty particular. But that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because the more I dove into what we're going to talk about today, the more I realized how much I didn't know about the industry. And so my first kind of question, and I guess, is, can you talk a little bit about your experience with coffee, your love with coffee, if it is love? Some people like being in an industry but don't like drinking part of that industry. But can you talk a little bit about that, you and your relationship with coffee?
Yeah, I definitely came into coffee later in life as well. I served in the Peace Corps after undergrad in the Dominican Republic, where I lived in a small town where the community grew a small amount of coffee that we hand dried on patios, hand ground by mortar and pestle, and roasted with sugar over an open fire. And culture, I mean, coffee is like part of the culture. It is in Dominicans' blood. Every house I would go to, I would have an overly sweetened shot of espresso 8 times per day. And I didn't know what it meant to overserve yourself with coffee until I lived there. But that was really kind of the part of coffee becoming really habitual for me, but also my entry point into working in coffee professionally.
Awesome. Did you have any bad experiences with the caffeine part of the coffee, the 8 cups?
Oh, yes. Heart palpitations are real when you are over caffeinated.
So today we are going to be talking about coffee, and we're going to be talking about sustainability in coffee. And there's just a couple of things about this term sustainability that, in doing some preliminary questions with friends and family, I found a lot of people didn't actually know what sustainability means, or what it means to be sustainable. In fact, I think the UN Foundation last year did a survey about the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN and found that 3/4 of Americans either had never heard of the Sustainable Development Goals or didn't really know much about them. I think 52% said they didn't know anything about them. So that's just a big buzzword or a big movement, I guess, in our sector that a lot of people don't really know anything about. Can you define what does it mean to be sustainable? What is that? What is this word that is popping up more and more in our lives?
Yeah, you're asking this at a very interesting time. I actually was having a friendly debate with friends last night just about what the word sustainability means. And the definitions vary widely. I have a friend who works in food waste where she only views sustainability as environmental sustainability. I was talking to one of our former classmates who said something that a professor said to her that has stuck with her that said, sustainability doesn't actually mean anything unless it's associated with another word, like environmental sustainability, social sustainability, economic sustainability. And those are kind of like the three pillars that I view sustainability through the lens of, is really the environmental, the social, and the economic sustainability. That those are kind of like the three main pillars. And I would argue that economic sustainability has to be the precursor for all of those. If you're asking people to make interventions to become more sustainable, if they don't have the money or the resources to do it, it's a really hard task.
Interesting, because we do hear a lot about the environmental component of sustainability. In fact, that's the first thing that a lot of people would ask me if that's what it meant. Do you mean environmentalism? I would say, well, we're getting there, right? So that's interesting, the economic component of sustainability. So, which brings us to coffee. Okay, when I go into a cafe and I buy my cappuccino, and I spend my $5 on my cappuccino or $4 on my cappuccino, there's a lot that went into that cup of coffee getting to my table, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, a few weeks ago, I was talking with Nasher Khan, who went to school with us. We were at a cafe in Queens, and he said that he talked a lot about the economics of things. And he said, do you realize what it took to get that cup of coffee to this table, and the economic repercussions of that? So that's what we're going to kind of jump into a little bit right now, of sustainability in coffee, and not necessarily, I guess, the environmental component, but the economic components of it. There is a lot more into that little bean, right?
Yeah. I mean, coffee is one of the most consumed beverages in the world, behind water.
Wow.
And so, it's part of people's everyday lives. People drink it every day. There's a coffee shop, especially in New York, almost on every corner. But I think that it's really detached from the product that it starts as, like your cup of cappuccino that's filled with steamed milk of your choosing, is really different from the coffee cherry that grows on a tree, mostly in the global South. So, yeah, I think that's like, if you talk to consumers, even understanding where coffee comes from, where it's grown, who grows it. It's 12 million smallholder farmers around the world who are operating on 3 hectares of land or less for the most part.
And those smallholder farmers, which Nitin, another graduate of ours, he and I talked about the smallholder farmers. How much of do they constitute the majority of the market for those coffee beans coming to my coffee shop and whatnot? There's not a lot of commercial farms, is what you're saying?
It's an interesting question. So they make up the majority of farmers from a percentage basis, but actually the country that exports the most amount of coffee is Brazil. And that's like a total, it's what drives the market prices. It's what, if there's a frost in Brazil or the rains change and it changes the volume in Brazil, that's really what drives the volatility in the commodities market. But those farmers are very different. I was just there in November, and the farms are full sun farms. The trees are, it's on 300 hectares of land. Wow. They're fully mechanized. So very different landscape than, say, going to Tolima, Colombia, where the farmers have 3 hectares of land and it's on the side of a mountain and it's all hand harvested. Or going to Rwanda, where the land has been subdivided across generations and people don't actually count their land size by number of hectares, but they count it by number of trees. So there's not one picture for who a coffee farmer is, what a coffee farm looks like, and even the varieties that are on farms vary differently compared to where they're grown.
So just to kind of like unpack that a little bit, it's called the C market, right? That's basically the coffee market. So you've got smallholder farmers that are contributing to the market or selling on the market, maybe directly, maybe not directly. And then you've got these large, we'll call them commercial farms, basically, that you said were automated and have all of the modern bells and whistles. So I'm assuming that for that large farm, the cost to grow a kilo of coffee, I guess, is much less than the cost on that smallholder farmer. But yet they're all in the same market, right? So it seems like the smallholder farmer is kind of at the mercy of a larger, what the larger farms can dictate. Is that accurate, or?
They're at the mercy of future traders.
Okay.
So the stock market is determining what the price of coffee is. So 2 years ago, there was a frost in Brazil. We knew that there would be contraction in the supply of coffee. And so prices skyrocketed. Prices just dropped this week again. And so, because Brazil is expecting a big boon in production this year. And so they're really at the mercy of the price that they're being paid for their coffee is detached from any of their realities at origin.
Okay.
From how much it costs them to produce coffee, how much coffee they're producing, on what land size, how much it takes to get their coffee from their farm to the mill, what the mill price is. There's a lot of actors that contribute to the supply chain to get it from the farm to the coffee shop.
So in respect to that, can you break down? There's a couple of terms that I've heard. The first one was a big buzzword, or it's been a buzzword for years, is fair trade, right? And then the second one, and not trying to double the question up, but just bear with me. The second one is direct trade, right? So I was buying my beans fair trade, and I was so proud of myself. And then somebody said, well, you need to buy them direct trade. And I was like, oh, well, okay. But direct trade, can you break those down? Because it seems like they may be great buzzwords, but have some limitations to how much they can help these smallholder farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like to call it a certification rodeo. As a consumer, you go to the coffee aisle and you're like, there are 12 different certifications. What do any of them mean? If I choose one, am I doing better to be a conscious consumer and do right by coffee farmers?
Exactly.
So direct trade was a kind of new buzzword that happened where you're basically creating more of an integrated supply chain where coffee buyers were buying directly from coffee farmers. Great in theory, you can kind of cut out some of the middle people, cut down on cost, assuming that you are then sharing more of that cost or value distribution is going back to the producer. The problem is there's not a lot of transparency that has to take place because you're doing these direct kind of not under the table, but you're just doing these direct relationships. So there's no oversight. Fair trade is one of the certification bodies. And there's Fair Trade International and there's Fair Trade USA. Fair Trade International focuses on cooperatives. Fair Trade USA is a separate entity that works with cooperatives and can work outside of cooperatives. That's a whole nother story. But the idea behind fair trade was to set a minimum price that producers needed to be paid. And then there's differentials that go on top of that to determine how much that coffee should be paid. For decades, that price has stayed at $1.40. Actually, just this week, Fair Trade announced that they were increasing the minimum price to $1.80 per pound.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a good step. And it's actually pretty amazing to see that Fair Trade raised its prices for the first time. But again, it's not really representative of what the farmer needs to be paid. It just puts a baseline in to kind of counteract any price shocks that are happening within the market.
So when you talked about that price on fair trade, I just want to kind of jump into the market in general again, like kind of go a little macro again, is something that I read while I was getting ready to talk to you was, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the nominal price of coffee hasn't really changed in over 40 years. Um, that's accurate? Like it is, because it seems like the cost of living for a farmer and the cost of inputs for a farmer and the cost of everything for a farmer is not what it was 40 years ago. So is that an accurate number? And why are all of these factors kind of going into that it stayed the same? Can you kind of break that down a little bit?
Yeah. So I wrote a white paper on the living income price for coffee, which we can get into that. But when I conducted that research in 2020, that the nominal price was the same or slightly lower than it had been than 40 years ago. That shifted a little during COVID because, like coffee, there were like supply chain constraints. And so we actually did, and there was a big run on coffee. So people were stockpiling coffee, which also drove the price up. And so over the last couple of years, we actually have seen the price increase for coffee prices. But just in the last couple of months, we're seeing that price go down. So if you look at the commodities market, like it goes like this. Like over the last decades, there's like ebbs and flows. And it's totally based on externalities happening to the coffee market. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. The cost of living has gone up. I think what's most shocking is the average age of a coffee farmer is like the mid 60s, which should be alarming to everybody because that means the younger generations aren't staying on coffee farms.
Wow, because there's no reason for them to economically, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's really laborious work. It's not economically incentivizing to stay on farms. So we're seeing youth either try to immigrate to the United States or move to the city to find better work.
So basically, these price fluctuations, if you will, they're shocks in the system. Like COVID was just a big shock. It's not a shift. It's not like all of a sudden everyone realized, oh, well, we need to raise the price of coffee permanently, right? Like raising a minimum wage, like to a number. So there's no governing body or mechanism that's going to force them to do that. The market basically fluctuates, like you said, as it will. So what can be done then to help farmers, coffee farmers, smallholder coffee farmers? Like you said, the age of the average age is going up because young people are leaving the market. What is there anything being done about that? What can be done about that? We won't get into me yet, what I can do about that, but is there anything that can be done or it can be done in the market wise to kind of shore these things up?
Yeah, there's a lot that the industry can do. Unfortunately, the industry has kind of demonstrated to consumers that they're paying $5 or $8 for a latte. So as an end consumer, you think like there must be somewhat equitable value distribution happening along the supply chain. Like certainly a farmer is getting their fair share of your $8 latte. But that's not the case. And I think that part of that problem was with like all the certifications and direct trade and, you know, this like buzz around like sustainable or ethical without actually having the data to back up what any of that really means. The exciting thing is there is work happening in the industry around really having more data-driven approaches to equitable pricing. In fact, the work that I've been doing over the last 4 years is really creating a new pricing methodology for coffee farmers that really separates how prices are set from the commodities market to be rooted in what farmers need to be paid. So it looks at what their land size is, what their average volume of production is. And then it looks at all of their cost of production. So how much are they spending on fertilizer? How much are they spending on pickers who work seasonally on their farm and they provide room and board to? How much money are they spending on gas to put in their motorcycle to bring their coffee from their farm to the local mill? And so it looks at all of those factors, and then it overlays a living income benchmark. So that's part of the development community, a new benchmark that is established that's really regional, context, and culturally specific, that looks at what's the average family size, how much does that family need to earn over the course of a year to have a roof over their head, to send their kids to school, to have a culturally appropriate, nutritious diet, and to set some money aside for unexpected shocks or events that may take place. And so taking all of those into consideration, you can establish this minimum price that farmers need to be paid that's really specific to their realities at origin. So it's not saying like $2.24 is the price that all farmers need to be paid, but it's saying, okay, in Tolima, Colombia, with how much coffee they're growing and their land size, paying them $2.24 per pound can get them that living income price. Will look very different in Rwanda or even Brazil. That model shifts where you're looking at how much are the day laborers, how much do they need to be paid to earn a living wage as seasonal workers versus how much does the estate owner need to be paid.
Okay, so this is actually the potential of this is industry-wide then, basically, not just Latin American and South American farmers or smallholder farmers, but across borders, across locales, and I really like how you're talking about the specifics of that particular region and that particular size farm and that particular. I think just getting more into those particulars is so important, because the way I've always looked at it as, like you said, it's just this broad view of, well, my cappuccino did go from $4.50 to $5. That's going to somebody, right? And never thinking, well, not necessarily. So that is interesting. With this metrics, what has been like the big key finding that you've discovered with as you've gotten more into this?
Yeah. One, finding that without data, you can't actually know that the price you were paying was a fair or equitable price. As we've done these studies, we found that we needed to increase our contract prices on each contract that we've signed. I think the coolest and most unexpected finding was how it really shifts the power differentials between coffee producers and buyers, because coffee producers now have access to this kind of refined data set where they can not only understand what their minimum price needs to be, so they can go to other buyers who haven't yet committed to this type of work, but can say, like, this is the minimum price that we're expecting for our coffee. And then the additional data pieces that they get are, okay, we see that two farms that are right next to each other, one of them has cost of production that's 200% higher than their neighbor. What are they doing differently? And so you can kind of tap into these like technical interventions that also need to take place at the ground level. The cooperatives have the ability to intervene and to really support those producers in a different way.
Okay, you said two big things right there that I don't know which one I want to jump on first, but I think when you were talking about having the data and understanding the data, of course, I'm thinking on this end, the final coffee shop end of it, right? That part of the data. And this kind of takes me back to when we were at SIPA, is how empowering data can be to the farmer, to the initial seller of that coffee bean, and to know what it's worth, to know what the market value, the true market value of that is. And basing that, but then also what they need to make a living to be able to live. I think that's so incredible. I think that that's so exciting. That I had never. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't think on that end of the spectrum. So that's really cool. The other part of it is this collaborative nature, if you will, of what other farmers are doing and how they can all benefit from that. Have you seen the farmers start to share this data and start to work with each other, or is it not still, I don't know, but is it competitive, or is there a collaborative nature that in this kind of sector on the smallholder farmers? Does that question make sense? That seemed. Yeah.
It does make sense. Yeah. So we mostly work with cooperatives. And so cooperatives by nature are working with each other. And so actually, like, key to all of the work that we were doing were these workshops where we were meeting with a sample size of producers that belonged to often a larger cooperative, where we were checking, this is the number that we're finding for cost of production. Like, does that fertilizer number ring true to you? And adjusting the numbers to really find an average that made sense for the majority of producers in that group. So yeah, it's definitely collaborative by nature. And then we also were seeing that, one producer was like, well, I have a really big garden that I grow, and that's how I offset some of the food prices that I'm providing to the pickers that come and work on my farm seasonally. And so just like adopting strategies like that, which is like pre-competitive by nature, just like saving your neighbor prices, but they're also, it's single. We mostly buy single origin coffee. We do some blends, but the cooperative is also building lots for us together. So it's not like we, for some of the higher end specialty coffee, you might just be buying from one particular farmer who's doing an interesting fermentation technique, and you're going to buy a smaller amount at a higher price because of that quality is there. But otherwise, cooperatives are really building lots together that are representative of the whole group of producers rather than just one producer. So it's really to their entire benefit to collaborate on both the data collection process, but also just different techniques that people are implementing on their farm.
And how difficult or how easy has it been to get buy-in from the farmers on this, to participate in something like this?
It's definitely all relationship based. It's the relationships that I found the easiest to work with, or the ones that we've kicked off first, was started with a trip to origin. So actually going and meeting the farmers in person, building that trust and relationship with each other, and them understanding that we're not trying to collect this data as a negotiation tool to undercut the prices that the market is saying, but really to use this as a way to really everybody have the data to set the correct contract prices.
That's interesting, because I'm sure there are some bad histories and bad case studies, even in the quote direct trade or whatnot, where farmers thought that they were getting a good deal and they were not, and so I'm sure that the building of relationships and building of that trust is so important. So that's interesting. So back to me and my cup of coffee, and just to kind of start to wrap this up, what is my role in all of this? What is my role as a customer? And I guess the role of the places that I buy coffee from is really what I'm asking. Where do I fit in any of this, or am I just hoping that I get the right cup of the right coffee?
Yeah. The National Coffee Association, they conducted a survey last year, and it And they had surveyed in consumers from around the United States, and it found that people's number one preference is roast level. So whether you like light, medium, or dark coffee. And then the second was around farmer equity. And so
wow.
It's a cool demonstrator that people do care. So I don't think that end consumers have been trying to contribute to the pricing crisis within the coffee lands. But I do think that it's on coffee consumers to ask the questions. If you have a local coffee shop, understand where they're buying their coffee from. Like, do they talk about where the coffee's from? Who was growing it? There are people behind every single cup of coffee that we drink. And so to keep that top of mind, that it's not just a cappuccino with some foamed steamed milk on top, but that it was a person who grew the raw ingredient that is part of the cup of coffee that you're drinking. And I think that that's a really good place to start.
Well, Grayson, thank you for sharing all of this with me, and really just breaking down the industry for me. Not the whole industry, but just this pricing component of the industry and what that means in that sustainability terms, that we hear so much about. I think a lot of I myself have really benefited from knowing a little bit more about what that means. So I really do appreciate you being patient with some confusion on my end, and helping me kind of grasp that. So I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It was fun to chat.
Okay, well, hopefully one day I'll make my way to your neighborhood in New York City, and we can have a cup of coffee and you could break it down. Not just the sustainable part of the coffee, but maybe some roasting methods that I'm not so sure
Perfect.
about. So,
I'll hold you to it.
Thanks, Grayson. Really appreciate it. Hey, everyone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. You can subscribe by clicking the thumbnail on the screen. And last, if you want to hear the audio version of this and future conversations, then subscribe to my podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Thank you, and see you soon.